Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Ask Mish. This question just felt so like timely and important for me to answer. Um, I've been getting a ton of questions from you guys, a ton of situations from you guys. So keep them coming. I'm going to make sure that we address all of them either in my stories on Instagram or here on the podcast. So make sure you're following me on Instagram at Mish of Nutrish Mish. I'll link that in my show notes. Um, so it's funny. She asked me about imposter syndrome, and the way she asked me was in a way that I've sort of like been experiencing it myself. So it sort of made me like stop and develop a framework kind of on the spot for like how I've overcome imposter syndrome like at various points in my career, but especially with this because obviously like you guys know me talking about nutrition 24/7 to going from nutrition to be, talking about all this other stuff. She's like, hey, listen, like I experience imposter syndrome in my job that is my career that I actually like know that I'm good at. How are you not experiencing that by sort of like talking about all this other stuff outside of just nutrition? And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't experiencing it that way, but I sort of have this internal framework in it. And her question made me actually kind of stop and like articulate it for the first time. And I think that's so helpful because imposter syndrome, literally everyone struggles with it except for the people that should. Like literally people that should. There's some people out there which I talk about that are like total full of shit people. They're the ones that should have imposter syndrome and they don't. So if you're struggling with imposter syndrome in general, that's a really good sign that like, and you're aware of it, that's a really good sign that like you're actually totally qualified. But I kind of like developed this sort of framework to help you get over it. It's the framework that I sort of subconsciously have used throughout various points in my career. And I hope that helps as like a good example of how to kind of like get you out of it because imposter syndrome sucks. It just dims people's light. It prevents people from making the impact on the world that they could be. So I hope that if this is something that you struggle with, that it resonates with you and it helps put you in a position where your light can shine a lot brighter. All right, so let's dive into this week's episode. All right, I loved this question because I think everybody sort of will relate to it in some capacity. So she said, men too, but she said women often feel like imposters in things. Like in meetings, even if I know what I'm talking about, I feel like I don't belong there. I was listening to your podcast and I was wondering if you felt that way. I think you're the perfect person for the podcast. You know about everything. Which I don't. You're open, you tell it like it is, but does the thought ever cross your mind if you're faking it? Maybe I'm not phrasing it right, but like fake it till you make it. But when do you know that you've made it? All right, let's dive into this. All right, so here's why I love this question. This is sort of what I think she's saying. She's saying, hey, I struggle with imposter syndrome as so many people do in my job that I do for a living, that I'm very qualified to do. I struggle with that. She's like, you do nutrition for a living. Now you're talking about all this other stuff. And like, the stuff that you're talking about makes sense, but how do you not experience imposter syndrome? Or do you talking about things other than nutrition? So let's unpack all of that because I thought that was such a great question. That's how I interpret it. I think that's how she meant it. All right, so to sort of break down imposter syndrome, let's kind of think about it like there's three different types of people in the world, right? The first type of person is the person that is just like flat out they're just full of shit. They're just full of shit, right? Now, like, and you could probably sense who those people are. They're very like arrogant, they're very like rigid in their thoughts and opinions. They talk about their opinions as if they're facts. They have like difficulty seeing other people's point of view. A lot of times their opinions are not necessarily like based in experience. They're like a lot of times they're fear based. They're just kind of like full of shit. They might come off like very insecure. That those people are the full of shit people, right? Like those are the people that should have imposter syndrome, but they don't. So that's kind of like one category of people. Then there's people who are like confident in their ability to like be in the room, right? They know they have something to offer. Like they might not know like the very perfect thing to say, but they know they're going to figure it out. They belong in the room, like they're confident, right? So then we have like those people. And then we have the people that are like qualified to be in the room, but they don't have the confidence associated with it. And those are the people that have imposter syndrome. They're the people that are like, all right, well, I'm in this room, but like, it's only a matter of time before they figure me out. Or like, I'm in this room and like, I'm going to say something, but like, is it going to come off stupid? Like, are they going to think this is dumb? Like, is this the right thing to say? Like, they're either like downplaying their ability or they're like feeling like a fraud or like a fake, right? So those are kind of like the three types of people. Now, the middle type, the second type that I was mentioning, that person doesn't necessarily have to know everything. Like that person doesn't necessarily have to like be perfect at it, right? It's the difference is a matter of confidence. Now, what was interesting is when I got this question, I actually want to do like a little bit of research on it. So I just Googled like imposter syndrome test or whatever, and something on Psychology Today came up. I'm going to read you the questions that Psychology Today asks people to kind of like self-assess if they have imposter syndrome. So listen to these questions. I'm just going to read off a couple of them. I'm not going to read all of them. I appear accomplished, even though that's not how I see myself. Number 2, I am filled with self-doubt about my abilities. Number 3, other people are much more capable and much more talented than I am. Number 4, I deserve my success. And it's like agree or disagree in a scale. I feel like I'm faking it at my job. I have a chronic feeling of inadequacy. I rarely talk about my accomplishments, blah, 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 blah. So as I was reading this, the only thing I could hear is like, these are just people that are qualified to be in the room. They're just not confident. I've personally never been in a room that I wasn't qualified to be in. I suck at spelling. If you said, hey, Michelle, guess what? You are going to be the judge of a spelling bee. Not only would I turn that down so fast, but I would never even be in that position. Nobody would ever think, oh, I need like the best speller in the world. Let me call Michelle. In fact, I would be the one that they would be like, stay the hell away from that bitch. She can't spell for shit. Like my mom actually was very concerned when I was young. She's like, Michelle, I was bad at spelling and math. And she was like, Michelle, what are you going to do? How are you going to survive in this world? Are you going to carry a dictionary and a calculator with you everywhere you go? And like, thank God phones were invented. Otherwise I would be totally fucked. But thank God that worked out for me. But my point is that I've never been in a room that I wasn't somewhat qualified to be in. Like you can't like weasel your way in. And I imagine for probably almost every single person who's ever been in a room and felt like they weren't qualified to be there, I bet you anything they were. All they were feeling was a lack of confidence. So you're feeling like a fake or a fraud, but really what you're feeling is some sort of like insecurity and self-doubt. It's not really like a lack of ability. So I think that's the first most important thing to understand. So now when I first started my career, right, I was really young. So I was working in the field when I was 19. If you guys know my story at all, I lied about my age on a job application. But at that point in my career, I was learning. I was like absorbing everything. I had no opinions. I had no nothing. I just was observing and a sponge and learning. I was so into it. And then, you know, I ended up getting a job at a local gym and I had the gym supporting me. And then when I went out on my own with Nutrish Mish, I was 23. So I was still really, really young. And even though I had a lot of nutrition experience under my belt, I for sure had imposter syndrome. I remember the first time I had my client, and this was funny because it was a client that I had at one of my previous jobs that I kind of like brought over. And I remember for some reason, even though I was telling her the same thing, when I had her get on that scale for the first time, I was like, dear God, please let her have lost weight. Please let this have worked. Please, please, please. Like I was so worried. And then guys, she got pregnant. And when I tell you that was the scariest thing that has ever, her pregnancy was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to tell her the wrong thing. I'm going to kill this baby. Like, and then it's going to be my fault. Like I had major imposter syndrome over it. Now, long story short, she had the healthiest pregnancy in the world. The baby was fine. Scarily enough, the baby is now in high school. So that just aged me a little bit. But I totally experienced imposter syndrome. And it wasn't due to my lack of ability. My lack of ability was amazing. I would not have been able to have been starting nutrition programs for companies and gyms when I was still in college. I wouldn't have been employed full time when I was still in college. I wouldn't have been able to start my own company right out of college if I wasn't qualified. I was totally qualified. I wouldn't have been in any room if I wasn't qualified, but I wasn't confident because it's scary, right? So here's how I started to overcome it, and here's how I overcame it quickly. The first thing is I looked for proof. Okay. I always looked for proof. So she got on that scale. She lost weight. Okay, cool. Something's working. That's good. Love it. Okay. You know, I was, everything I said made sense, right? I'd be like, okay, like, does this make sense? I would always double check myself. I looked for proof. And as I got more and more clients and as more and more clients saw success, I was like, okay, there's proof. There is factual evidence here. This is no longer about my feelings. There are facts here that I am good at this, I am qualified, and everything that I'm doing is in some capacity making sense. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's making sense. Another thing that I had, which I think is really important, is I had a mentor. I had somebody at the time who did believe in me, and when I kind of didn't feel super confident and I was feeling a little imposter syndrome-y, they would just confirm that I was doing the right thing and on the right track. So you don't necessarily need like a mentor, but if you have somebody that you kind of like trust in your workplace or wherever, and you're like, yeah, like I trust their opinion, I trust their guidance, you can always ask them, because I think that's something that's really important to understand, and something that I've learned as I've gotten older is from where you're sitting in your point of view, you don't always have clarity. Like when it's you and your life and your body and your brain, you don't always have the clarity and the perspective that other people have looking at you. Right. And I'm sure you could think about this in so many areas of your life. Like, have you ever had a friend or something who just, let's say, was in like a really bad relationship and you're like, girl, like, do you not see the giant red flag in front of you? And she's like, what? No, it's fine. And like making excuses for it. Like you see it so clearly because like you don't have that, you have like the distance, you have the perspective, but she's in it, she can't see it. It's like when you're in the eye of the tornado, you can't see it, the storm around you. Right. So you're not necessarily meant to always have the perspective and have the clarity. And you have to remember your brain is designed to always like look for threats. Your brain is designed to look for threats, and your brain is also designed to keep you safe. So when you're doing something out of your comfort zone, when you're doing something new, when you're in that room for the first time, right, your brain's like, ooh, this is new. This is not safe. So sometimes it's good just to have somebody that has a little distance or a different perspective than you that you can rely on to kind of like give you that feedback. I had that at that point in my career, and I was very, very grateful for it. And it helped me a great deal when I wasn't necessarily feeling confident. And then it's sort of just about like doing reps, right? Like you keep doing reps over and over again, right? You keep like putting yourself in those positions over and over again. You keep getting those results over and over again. And now all of a sudden, like you start to develop confidence. I've talked about confidence in other episodes. It's the act of keeping promises to yourself, right? So which is not my thing. I think Ed Milet said that. I can't take credit for it, but it's the act of keeping promises to yourself. So if I keep promising, okay, I'm going to keep showing up for my clients, I'm going to keep trying to find the best solution for my clients. And then over time, I keep that keeps happening, then I have some proof. The last thing I did, and I don't know who put this idea in my head, but I'm so grateful that they did. I, like most people, was a little bit of a perfectionist. And every time that perfection was not achieved, I used to perceive it as a failure. And when you're constantly perceiving things that don't go right as failures, you are always going to feel like an imposter. So I think for that, it's really important to manage your expectations that there are some parts that are going to go wonderfully in whatever you're doing. And like, there are some parts that are not. Like, it's inevitable. And if you manage your expectations, like you're going to screw something up, and every single person screws something up. Elon Musk has screwed something up. Like, it's going to happen. When it does happen, it will be a lot less jarring to you. Instead of perceiving that as a failure, as we all can do from time to time, look at it as a learning opportunity, right? So if you look at really successful people, you will see every single one of them has messed up from time to time, literally every single one of them. Now, do they hide in a corner and like never work again and never do anything again and like completely lose their impact on the world? Or do they say, okay, cool. We're going to learn from that and we're going to come back better next time? Once I started looking at that, like my process and my program and my business and everything got so much better. It's so easy to get caught in like the perfectionistic cycle, right? But then like every time that you don't achieve perfectionism, you look at that as a failure when it's really not a failure. It's really like an opportunity to learn and grow, and it's inevitable, and every single person deals with that. But again, if you're perceiving it as a failure, it's going to kind of keep you in this like sort of imposter syndrome cycle. Okay, so let's practice getting over imposter syndrome in the context of me starting this podcast, just so you can kind of see how I experienced it and kind of just walk you through just so it can help you in whatever situation you might be experiencing imposter syndrome in. So the first thing is I want to look for proof, right? So first of all, I'm not, like you said, like, do you feel like you're faking it? Like, I am not claiming to be an expert in anything that I'm talking about. I'm just like kind of giving my advice and my opinions. So I'm not claiming to be like a licensed therapist. I'm not claiming to be a psychologist. I'm just kind of like giving like my advice and my opinions. So I don't feel like I'm faking it because it's based in my advice and my opinions. If I was trying to be like, oh, I'm an expert in this or I'm an expert in that, then yeah, no, I completely would probably feel like a fraud, because I kind of would be, because I'm not an expert in those things. So that would make sense. Now, do I have proof that I'm good at giving advice? Do I have proof that I'm good at that my advice that I give helps people? So I said this actually in the first episode we did of the rebrand. I wanted to do this forever. I wanted to talk about more than just nutrition forever. Because when I am having my sessions, you have to remember, I get the people that really struggle with food, right? And when people really struggle with food, it's not just about the food, it's about all the other stuff going on in their lives. There's usually a lot of underlying things that go on with that. So I end up dabbling and giving my opinion and my advice in those things too, to help minimize the triggers that are causing them to eat, in addition to, the food stuff as well. So I've seen over time, when I do give that advice, it does resonate with people and it does help change their lives. So that's what really inspired me to kind of want to start talking about that stuff, as I did see that, while I'm sure I don't give the best advice on everything every single time, that a lot of times it has helped people, and I saw that. I did have proof of that, but like in no way, shape, or form am I claiming to be an expert on any of these things. This is just my advice that I'm giving. So that was number one. Number two, a mentor. Now, like obviously I didn't have like a mentor for this podcast, but I did have major imposter syndrome about not about talking. I felt confident in my ability to help people because I do it. I've done it so much, but I really was nervous about talking publicly about things other than nutrition, just like outside of sessions. Like that, I had a lot of imposter syndrome about actually. But again, I know that in myself, I don't necessarily have the best perspective. So I have like probably 3 or 4 people that are very close to me that are so sick of me asking and hearing about it. So I'd be like, all right, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Did this come off weird? Did that come off weird? If you guys have noticed, I've asked you guys in my stories. So I've asked you guys in my stories, like, hey, how do you feel about this? Do you like this? Does this sound cool? Are you interested in these topics? I've asked you guys, my audience. I've seen the numbers, go up as we put out more episodes. I've asked people ad nauseum how things are coming off because I don't always have the best perspective. And as I've seen that stuff, get better and improve and all of that kind of stuff, and I've seen the facts to support it, it increases my confidence and it overrides my potential imposter syndrome. And then lastly, mistakes. Now this podcast is a minute old. I haven't said anything yet that, at least I don't think I have, that's pissed anybody off to the extent that it has gotten to me. But I'm sure I will at some point. I'm sure I will make mistakes. I've managed my expectations around that. I've made 1.5 million mistakes at Nutrish Mish, which if I didn't make mistakes, our program wouldn't be as good as it was. But I'm not going to look at that as a failure. I'm going to look at that as like, okay, this is like a learning opportunity for me, right? So we're going to get better. But again, it's all under that understanding that I'm just kind of giving my opinion. I'm not giving a fact. If somebody says, hey, I tried your advice and it sucked, like that's probably, that might happen. That's okay. But if I do more good than harm, like that's my goal. If I have a more positive impact, if I get people thinking in a different way, if I have a bigger positive impact than I do negative impact, that's definitely the goal. So that's sort of like how it relates to the podcast. So no, do I feel like I'm faking it? I don't. I will say probably the one thing I felt the most nervous about wasn't my ability to talk about other subjects. It was just how it was going to get received. So I did really rely heavily on other people for that, but like so far so good. So how does that all relate back to you, right? So number one is I want you to start looking for proof. And while you're looking for proof, I also want you to be very careful about how you're talking to yourself. Your self-talk will dictate so much. If every time I was about to start my podcast, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to talk about something. They're not going to believe me. They're not going to think it's right. Like, why am I even saying this? Am I even qualified to talk about this stuff? It's only a matter of time before they're going to think I'm a fraud and blah, blah, blah. That's not helpful, right? In any situation. 9.9 and maybe even 10 times out of 10, if you're in that room, it's because you deserve to be there. Like it's rare people get into a room that they don't deserve to be in. You might not feel like you do, but we have to change that. But if you keep telling yourself over and over again, I don't deserve to be here, I don't deserve to be here, your brain is going to believe that. Your brain does not know the difference between a fact and a belief. So if you keep telling your brain something over and over again with emotion, it's going to operate as if it's true. If you keep telling your brain the opposite over and over with emotion, it's going to act as if it's not true. How do we know if it's true or not? Well, a fact means that if I put 100 people in a room, 100 people would agree. So if I put 100 people in a room and said, hey, are you not qualified to be in this room? Should you not be in this room? Do you not have the ability to? Somebody's going to disagree. So that's your belief. It's not a fact. And I guarantee you, if you get brave and you start taking the action and you start speaking up just to gauge people's just to see what happens, I guarantee you, you're probably going to get a positive response. That's going to increase your confidence. And when you start doing those things, that's what's going to help you overcome imposter syndrome. Because remember, imposter syndrome is not that first group of people that I talked about in the beginning of this segment, right? It's not the people that are totally full of shit. We know who those people are. Imposter syndrome is when you are qualified to be in that room, but you feel like a fake. You feel like a fraud. And it's all based in your confidence. It boils down to being, insecure. Remember the questions in that test that I was looking up on, Psychology Today, it was all based on confidence. So if you're experiencing imposter syndrome and we increase your confidence, that's going to help cure your imposter syndrome. And then you can have the impact on the world that you're supposed to have. All right, guys, so let's eradicate imposter syndrome. We don't have time for her. We don't have any room at the table. We have too much to do. We have too much of an impact to make. Like let's get rid of her. If imposter syndrome is something that you guys struggle with, check out the show notes. I've started counseling people one-on-one outside of just nutrition in our new program called Mish Mindset. So check that out. We just got through our first beta round of clients, and it's been such a cool experience watching all of their lives change. So we're taking on a second round, so you can check that out. The application is in the show notes. Also, follow me on Instagram at Mish of Nutrition. Nutrish Mish, also in the show notes. I want to meet everybody. I want you guys, if you guys listen to this podcast, I want to know who you are so we could be besties, follow each other, all that good stuff. Shoot me a DM with any of your problems, questions, concerns. I will address them in my stories as well as on the podcast. And I will see you guys next week.